The last thing I expected to find in my mother's jewelry box was a DNA test that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. For 28 years, Patricia Chen told everyone who would listen that I was adopted, that I wasn't really her blood, that she took me in out of the goodness of her heart. She said it at family dinners, whispered it to neighbors, announced it to strangers in grocery stores, whenever I didn't meet her impossible standards. But standing in her bedroom, 3 days after her funeral, holding lab results dated just 2 months before her death, I realized the cruelest joke of all. I wasn't the adopted one. My golden brother Marcus was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Arizona heat was suffocating that graduation day in 2015, but nothing compared to the warmth I felt standing on the stage at Phoenix Community College. Patricia Chen sat in the third row, her perfectly styled black hair catching the auditorium lights, her hands folded in her lap like she was attending a business meeting, rather than watching her daughter receive her associate degree in biology. She wore the expression she always wore when I accomplished something, a mixture of mild surprise and reluctant acknowledgement, as if my success was an inconvenience she hadn't planned for. I was 22, and naive enough to believe that walking across that stage might finally earn her approval. The dean announced my name with special recognition for maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working 2 jobs, and I searched the crowd for some sign that Patricia was proud. She clapped exactly 3 times, precise and measured, the same way she did everything else. Marcus, my younger brother by 3 years, didn't even look up from his phone. After the ceremony, we stood outside the auditorium while other families took photos and shared congratulations. Patricia adjusted the collar of her crisp white blouse and checked her watch. "Well, that's done," she said, as if my graduation was an item to be crossed off her to-do list. "Robert's waiting in the car, we should get going." That was it. No celebration dinner, no proud moment, no acknowledgement that I had just become the first person in our family to graduate from college. As we walked toward the parking lot, I heard her talking to another parent who had complimented my achievement. "Oh, Sarah's not actually mine," Patricia said in that casual tone she reserved for discussing the weather. "She's adopted. We took her in when she was small." It's amazing what some children can accomplish when they're given proper structure. The words hit me like they always did, a familiar sting that I'd learned to absorb and ignore. I had heard variations of this speech my entire life. At parent-teacher conferences, she would introduce herself and immediately add, "Sarah's adopted, of course." When neighbors praised my grades or work ethic, she would smile tightly and say, "Well, you know how it is with adopted children. They try harder because they have to." The implication was always clear. My achievements were noteworthy only because I wasn't really a Chen, wasn't really her blood, wasn't really family. But that day, something felt different. Maybe it was the heat, or the exhaustion from working 40 hours a week while taking a full course load. Or maybe it was finally reaching a breaking point I didn't know I'd been approaching. As we drove home in Robert's spotless BMW, Patricia chattering about the real estate market, and Marcus texting someone about weekend plans, I found myself studying their faces in the rearview mirror. Marcus had Robert's pale complexion and light brown hair. Nothing like Patricia's darker Asian features or my own mixed heritage that I'd always assumed came from an unknown biological father. The Chen family house on Maple Ridge Drive was a testament to Patricia's success in real estate development. Spanish tile, desert landscaping, and enough square footage to house 3 families comfortably. I had my own room, my own bathroom, my own space that never quite felt like home. Because Patricia made sure I understood it was temporary, conditional, a privilege that could be revoked if I didn't continue to earn it through perfect behavior and exceptional performance. That evening, while Marcus played video games in the living room and Robert watched television, I sat at the kitchen table with acceptance letters from Arizona State University spread in front of me. I had been accepted into their pre-med program with a partial scholarship, but partial wasn't enough. The remaining tuition, room, and board would cost more than I made in a year at my 2 jobs combined. I had been working up the courage for weeks to ask Patricia and Robert for help, knowing that Marcus's college fund had been established since birth, while mine had never existed. "Patricia," I said, using the formal name she had always insisted on instead of Mom, I wanted to talk to you about Arizona State. She looked up from her laptop where she was reviewing property listings. What about it? I got into the pre-med program, and I was hoping we could discuss the financial situation. The scholarship covers about 60%, but I'll need help with the rest. Patricia closed her laptop with a soft click and folded her hands on the table. Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Robert and I have discussed this, and we don't think university is the right path for you right now. The words didn't make sense at first. I don't understand. I've wanted to be a doctor since I was 12. You know that. Wanting something and being realistic about it are two different things, she said. Medical school is extremely competitive and expensive. We think you should continue working, maybe take some additional community college courses. There are plenty of good careers that don't require a 4-year degree. I stared at her, heat rising in my chest. But Marcus is going to ASU in the fall. His grades aren't even as good as mine. Marcus is different, Patricia said simply. He's family. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert cleared his throat from the living room, and Marcus laughed at something on his screen. But in the kitchen, the air felt thick and poisonous. I had always known I was treated differently, always understood that I was the outsider, but hearing it stated so plainly felt like being slapped. I'm family too, I whispered. Patricia's expression didn't change. You're part of our household, Sarah. You have been since you were 7 years old, and we've provided for you. But you're not blood. Marcus is our son, our responsibility, our priority. I thought you understood that by now. I looked at her face, searching for some sign of the woman who had raised me, who had driven me to school and signed my report cards and bought me clothes for picture day. But there was nothing there except cool calculation, as if she was explaining a business transaction to a client who had misunderstood the terms. Besides, she continued, adopted children often struggle with the pressure of advanced academics. It's not personal, it's just biology. Marcus has our genes, our drive. It's natural that he would be better suited for higher education. That night, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had just happened. Patricia had always been cold, always made it clear that I was different, but I had assumed that was just her personality. I had spent 15 years trying to earn her love through perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect gratitude for the home she had provided. But now I understood that it didn't matter what I accomplished or how hard I tried. In her mind, I would never be good enough, because I would never be blood. The next morning, I withdrew my acceptance to Arizona State and enrolled in additional courses at the community college. I picked up a third job cleaning offices downtown and told myself that this was just a temporary setback, that I would find another way to achieve my dreams. But deep down, something had shifted. The naive girl who believed that love could be earned through achievement was gone, replaced by someone harder and more clear-eyed about the reality of her situation. For the next 6 years, I lived in that house like a ghost. I worked my jobs, took my classes, and stayed out of Patricia's way. Marcus graduated high school with mediocre grades and went to ASU on the family's dime, where he promptly failed 3 classes his first semester and switched his major 4 times. Patricia made excuses for him, hired tutors, and paid for additional semesters without complaint. When I mentioned that I had finished my bachelor's degree in biology through part-time evening classes, she nodded absently and changed the subject. I watched Marcus struggle through college while I excelled in every class one took, watched Patricia write check after check for his expenses, while I survived on ramen noodles and secondhand textbooks. I watched Robert treat Marcus like the son he'd never had while barely acknowledging my existence, even though I was the one who helped Patricia with her real estate paperwork and managed the household finances when she was too busy to deal with them. The breaking point came in 2021 during Marcus's 6th year of college. He had finally managed to graduate with a degree in communications and a 2.1 GPA, and Patricia threw him a party that cost more than I made in 3 months. The house was filled with family friends and business associates, all congratulating the golden boy on his achievement, while I served drinks and cleaned up after guests. I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher when I overheard Patricia talking to her sister about Marcus's future. We're so proud, she was saying. Robert's going to bring him into the medical supply business. It's wonderful to have a son who can carry on the family legacy. Her sister asked about me, whether I was doing well, and Patricia's response was the same as always. Oh, Sarah's not really family. She's adopted, you know. Sweet girl, very helpful around the house, but she's not a Chen. The business will stay with blood relatives. I stopped moving, my hands frozen on a wine glass that suddenly felt too heavy to hold. The business she was talking about was Chen Medical Equipment Supply, the company my father David had built from nothing before his death when I was 7. The company that bore the name I had carried my entire life, the legacy that should have been mine as David Chen's daughter. But in Patricia's mind, I had no claim to it, because I wasn't really his child. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I had spent years accepting Patricia's version of our family's story, believing that I was an outsider who should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection and opportunity came my way. But something about the casual way she had dismissed my entire existence, the matter-of-fact tone she used when explaining why I would never be considered for the business my father had built, sparked something cold and dangerous in my chest. If Patricia wanted to play games about blood and family and who belonged where, then maybe it was time I learned the rules, and maybe it was time I started playing to win. The next morning, I began researching genealogy services and DNA testing companies. If Patricia was so certain about who was family and who wasn't, if she was so confident about blood and genetics and inherited traits, then perhaps it was time to get some scientific proof. I ordered a comprehensive DNA analysis kit and waited for the results that would either confirm everything she had told me or reveal secrets that someone had been very careful to hide. 3 weeks later, the email arrived with my genetic profile attached. I opened it in the parking lot of the medical supply company, where I had started working part-time, helping with inventory and customer service. The results were not what I expected. According to the analysis, I was 100% David Chen's biological daughter. My DNA showed clear Asian ancestry that matched perfectly with his genetic markers, which I had obtained from a hair sample in his old belongings that Patricia had never bothered to throw away. But there was something else, something that made my hands shake as I read through the detailed breakdown. The system had identified several genetic relatives in their database, people who shared significant DNA with me. One of them was listed as a potential half-sibling, someone who shared one parent with me. The name on the profile was M. Hendricks, Marcus Hendricks, not Marcus Chen. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the screen and trying to process what I was seeing. If the DNA results were accurate, Marcus shared no genetic material with David Chen at all. He was related to me only through Patricia, which meant he was Robert's biological son, not David's. The golden boy, the heir apparent, the one who had been handed everything I had been denied, wasn't a Chen at all. The irony was so complete, it felt like fiction. For 28 years, Patricia had told everyone who would listen that I was adopted, that I wasn't really family, that I didn't belong. She had used this supposed fact to justify every slight, every dismissal, every moment when she chose Marcus over me. But the truth was exactly the opposite. I was David Chen's daughter, the true heir to his name and his legacy. Marcus was the outsider. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. One who didn't belong. The one whose claim to the family was based on lies and manipulation. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities and implications. Patricia had built her entire narrative around the idea that blood mattered more than anything else, that genetics determined worth and belonging and the right to inherit. But if that was true, if DNA really was the ultimate arbiter of family status, then she had been wrong about everything that mattered. That evening, I confronted her with printouts of the DNA results. Patricia was in her home office, reviewing contracts for a new development project, when I knocked on the door and walked in without waiting for permission. I placed the papers on her desk and watched her face as she read through the genetic analysis. Her expression didn't change for a long moment. She read through the documents twice, her lips pressed into a thin line, before looking up at me with eyes that seemed older and more tired than I had ever seen them. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "I had genetic testing done," I said. "Funny thing about DNA, Patricia. It doesn't lie." She leaned back in her chair and studied my face. "What do you want, Sarah?" "I want to know why," I said. Why did you spend my entire life telling people I was adopted when you knew I was David's biological daughter? Why did you let me believe I was an outsider when Marcus is the one who isn't really family? Patricia was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because it was easier. Easier for who? For everyone. She stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the backyard. When David died, I was 32 years old, with a 7-year-old daughter, and no idea how to run a medical supply business. Robert was David's business partner, and he was kind enough to help me navigate the legal and financial complications. One thing led to another, and we developed feelings for each other. I waited for her to continue, my heart pounding against my ribs. Robert had been married before, she said. He had a son from that marriage, a boy about your age whose mother had abandoned them both. When we got married, it seemed natural to blend our families. But Marcus needed stability, needed to feel like he belonged somewhere. And you? She turned to face me. You were so strong, so independent. You seemed fine on your own. So you decided to make me the outsider instead of him. I decided to make things easier for a damaged little boy who had already been abandoned once. Her voice was sharper now, defensive. Marcus needed to feel secure, needed to believe he was really part of our family. You were David's daughter. You had his name, his genetics, his business to inherit. Marcus had nothing except what Robert and I could give him. I stared at her, trying to process the twisted logic of what she was saying. So you lied about my parentage to make him feel better about his? I protected my family, she said. Both of my children. No, I said, my voice steady and cold. You protected Marcus at my expense. You made me believe I was worthless, that I didn't belong, that I should be grateful for scraps of attention and affection. You denied me opportunities and resources that were rightfully mine, and you gave them to someone who wasn't even David's son. Patricia's face hardened. Marcus is my son too. I raised him, I love him, and I won't apologize for putting his needs first. Even when it meant destroying me? You weren't destroyed, she said. You're fine. You're strong and capable and successful. The lies didn't hurt you. That was the moment I realized Patricia would never understand what she had done, would never acknowledge the years of psychological damage she had inflicted, would never admit that her choices had been wrong. In her mind, she had made a reasonable decision to protect one child at the expense of another, and the fact that I had survived meant the sacrifice had been acceptable. I gathered the DNA results from her desk and walked toward the door. Marcus isn't David's son, I said without turning around. Which means he has no legal claim to Chen Medical Equipment Supply. It should have been mine all along. Sarah, wait. I stopped in the doorway but didn't look back. What are you going to do? I thought about that question for a long moment. What was I going to do with this information? How was I going to handle the knowledge that my entire life had been built on lies designed to benefit someone else at my expense? I don't know yet, I said finally. But I think it's time Marcus learned the truth about blood and family and who really belongs where. That night, I packed a single suitcase and left Phoenix forever. I didn't say goodbye to Marcus or Robert, didn't leave a note or explanation. I just drove north until I reached Portland, Oregon, where I rented a small apartment and enrolled in a master's program in genetic counseling at Oregon Health and Science University. I had decided that if DNA was going to be the battlefield, then I needed to become an expert in the science of genetics and inheritance. For the next 3 years, I studied molecular biology, population genetics, and inheritance patterns. I learned how to read genetic markers, trace family lineages, and identify biological relationships with scientific precision. I worked in research labs, analyzed thousands of DNA samples, and became one of the most skilled genetic counselors on the West Coast. But more importantly, I learned how to weaponize the truth. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2025, 3 years after I had walked out of the Chen house and never looked back. I was in my office at Portland Genetic Solutions, reviewing a complex paternity case for a high-profile divorce attorney, when my phone buzzed with an Arizona area code I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Sarah Chen? The voice was unfamiliar, professional but tired. This is Sarah. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Martinez from Phoenix General Hospital. I'm calling regarding Patricia Chen. Are you her daughter? The word daughter hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard anyone refer to me that way in years, hadn't thought of Patricia as my mother in even longer. What's happened? I'm sorry to inform you that Mrs. Chen passed away early this morning. She suffered a massive stroke at her home. We tried to reach her emergency contacts, but you were listed as next of kin on some of her medical documents. I sat in silence, staring out the window at the Portland skyline while trying to process what I was hearing. Patricia was dead. The woman who had shaped my entire understanding of family, worth, and belonging was gone, and somehow I was the person the hospital had called first. Are there arrangements I need to make? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Her husband, Robert Hendricks, is handling most of the arrangements, but there are some legal documents that require your signature. Also, Mrs. Chen left specific instructions that you be contacted regarding her personal effects. Personal effects. I wondered what Patricia could possibly have thought I would want from her. We hadn't spoken since the night I confronted her about the DNA results, hadn't exchanged a single word in 3 years. But apparently, even in death, she had something she needed me to know. I flew back to Phoenix that afternoon, renting a car at the airport and driving through the familiar desert landscape that had once been home. The city looked smaller than I remembered, the sprawling developments less impressive after 3 years of Oregon's green mountains and clean air. By the time I reached Scottsdale, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me why I had once loved this place. The Chen house looked exactly the same from the outside, but when Robert answered the door, I barely recognized him. He had aged a decade in 3 years, his hair completely gray now, his face gaunt and hollow. He stared at me for a long moment before stepping aside to let me in. Sarah, he said quietly, thank you for coming. The house smelled different, stale and medicinal, as if Patricia's illness had left traces in the air itself. Robert led me to the living room where Marcus sat on the couch, looking up from his phone with an expression of surprise and something that might have been guilt. Sarah, Marcus said, standing awkwardly, I didn't know you were coming. The hospital called me, I said simply. Something about legal documents and personal effects. Robert cleared his throat. Patricia had a stroke 6 months ago, a minor one, but it made her think about her mortality. She spent the last few months getting her affairs in order, making sure everything was properly documented. I nodded, waiting for him to explain why that involved me. As far as I knew, Patricia had written me off as completely as I had written her off. We were strangers who happened to share some history, and a last name I had been considering changing. She left instructions, Robert continued. Specific things she wanted you to have and some documents she wanted you to see. She said. He paused, looking uncomfortable. She said there were things you needed to know before she was gone. Marcus shifted on the couch, his eyes darting between Robert and me. What kind of things? Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the mantelpiece and picked up a manila envelope that looked thick with papers. Patricia said Sarah should read these alone first. Then we could all talk. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of whatever secrets Patricia had decided to burden me with from beyond the grave. The irony wasn't lost on me that she had spent my entire life withholding truth and affection, only to leave me with some final revelation I probably didn't want to hear. I'll be in my old room, I said, heading for the stairs. The room that had been mine for 15 years was exactly as I had left it, down to the textbooks stacked on the desk, and the acceptance letter from Arizona State pinned to the bulletin board. Someone had been dusting it, keeping it preserved like a shrine to the daughter who had walked away. I sat on the bed and opened the envelope. The first document was a letter in Patricia's precise handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before her death. My hands shook slightly as I began to read. Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have come home for reasons I hope will become clear. I know you hate me. I know you believe I destroyed your life and stole your birthright to give to Marcus. You are right about some things and wrong about others. But mostly I have been a coward who let you believe lies because the truth was too complicated and painful to explain. I paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. You are David Chen's biological daughter. You always were. The DNA test you showed me 3 years ago only confirmed what I had always known. But Marcus is not Robert's biological son, as you assumed. Marcus is also David's child. He is your half-brother, born from an affair David had in the last year of our marriage." The letters slipped from my hands as the words sank in. Marcus was David's son. Not Robert's son, not an outsider who had been brought into the family through marriage, but David's biological child, my half-brother. I picked up the letter with trembling fingers and kept reading. David's affair was with a woman named Jennifer Hendricks, who worked as a nurse at one of the medical facilities we supplied. When Jennifer became pregnant, David confessed everything to me. He begged for forgiveness, promised it would never happen again, swore he would do anything to save our marriage. I was devastated, but I loved him and I wanted to forgive him. We were trying to work things out when he died in that car accident. The room felt too small, too warm. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Marcus and I had played as children, where we had built sandcastles and chased lizards and shared the easy camaraderie of siblings who didn't know they were competing for their mother's love. Jennifer was 23 and unmarried when Marcus was born. She had no family support and couldn't afford to raise a child alone. She contacted me when Marcus was 6 months old, desperate and broke. She knew David was the father, but she also knew he was dead, and that I was under no legal obligation to help her. But when I saw Marcus, I saw David immediately. The resemblance was unmistakable. I forced myself to keep reading, even though every word was rewriting my understanding of our family history. I made a choice that I have regretted every day since. I told Jennifer I would adopt Marcus and raise him as my own, but only if she agreed to never contact him again and never reveal the truth about his parentage. I told her that if she ever tried to interfere, I would make sure she never saw him again. Then I married Robert Hendricks, Jennifer's ex-husband, who had always wanted children, but had been unable to have them with Jennifer. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening clarity. Robert hadn't been Marcus's biological father, bringing his son into a blended family. He had been the ex-husband of Marcus's mother, the man Patricia had married, to give Marcus a legal father, and to ensure that Jennifer could never claim parental rights. I told everyone that Marcus was Robert's son from his previous marriage to make the story cleaner, to avoid questions about why I had adopted a random baby, and I told everyone that you were adopted because it was easier than explaining that my husband had cheated on me, and that I was raising his illegitimate child alongside his legitimate one. People understood adoption as charity. They didn't understand forgiveness as weakness. I sank back onto the bed, my head spinning. Patricia hadn't been protecting Marcus from the truth about his adoption. She had been protecting herself from the humiliation of admitting that her husband had betrayed her, and that she had been weak enough to forgive him by raising his love child. The business arrangements became complicated after David's death. Legally, you were his sole heir, entitled to inherit Chen Medical Equipment Supply in its entirety. But I convinced myself that David would have wanted Marcus to have a share, that he would have made provisions for both his children if he had lived. So I restructured the company through a series of trusts and legal maneuvers that gave Marcus equal standing with you, even though he had no legal claim to David's estate. I thought about all the times Patricia had told me the business would go to blood relatives, all the times she had dismissed my interest in the company that bore my father's name. She hadn't been giving Marcus something that belonged to him. She had been giving him something that belonged to me. I know this doesn't excuse the way I treated you. I know that calling you adopted, making you feel like an outsider, denying you opportunities and affection, while giving Marcus everything he wanted was wrong. But I was so angry, Sarah. So angry at David for betraying me, so angry at myself for forgiving him, so angry at the situation that forced me to choose between punishing an innocent child and betraying my own daughter. The letter continued for 3 more pages, detailing the legal arrangements Patricia had made, the financial structures she had created, and the specific provisions she had included in her will. But the core message was clear. Everything I had believed about my family, about my place in it, about who belonged and who didn't, had been built on lies designed to protect Patricia's pride and reputation. When I finished reading, I sat in silence for a long time, trying to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. Marcus wasn't the golden child who had been favored. because he was Robert's biological son. He was David's illegitimate child, the living reminder of my father's betrayal, the reason my parents' marriage had been falling apart when David died. And I wasn't the adopted outsider who should be grateful for scraps of attention. I was the legitimate daughter whose inheritance had been stolen to provide for my father's mistake. But more than that, Marcus and I were both David's children. We were both Chens by blood, both entitled to our father's name and legacy, both victims of Patricia's decision to build our family on a foundation of lies and shame. I walked downstairs to find Robert and Marcus exactly where I had left them, sitting in the living room and avoiding eye contact with each other. They looked up when I entered, their faces full of questions they were afraid to ask. "Did you know?" I asked Robert. He nodded slowly. "I've always known. Patricia told me everything before we got married. She said she needed to be honest about why she was willing to marry me, why she needed a father for Marcus." "And you agreed to it? The fake story about Marcus being your son?" "I loved Patricia," he said simply. "And I loved Marcus from the moment I met him. It didn't matter to me whose blood he carried. He was my son in every way that mattered." I turned to Marcus, who was staring at me with wide eyes. "Did you know?" "Know what?" he asked, but his voice was uncertain, as if he suspected what I was about to tell him. "That you're not adopted either. That you're David's son, just like I am." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again without making a sound. Robert reached over and put a hand on his shoulder. "You're my half-brother," I continued. "We're both David Chen's children. The only difference is that I was legitimate and you weren't." Marcus stood up abruptly, his face flushing red. "That's not possible. Patricia always said. She told everyone that you were adopted, that I was Robert's son from his first marriage." "Patricia told everyone a lot of things that weren't true," I said, pulling out the letter and the additional documents Patricia had left. "David had an affair with a woman named Jennifer Hendricks, Robert's ex-wife. You were born from that affair." I watched Marcus's face as he processed this information, watched the same confusion and disbelief I had felt just an hour earlier. Robert was nodding, confirming what I was saying, his own eyes filled with tears. "Jennifer is your biological mother," Robert said softly. "She couldn't take care of you, so Patricia adopted you when you were 6 months old. But she made Jennifer promise to never contact you again, to never tell you the truth." Marcus sank back onto the couch, his hands shaking. "So Patricia wasn't my mother either? She raised you," I said. "She loved you, in her way. But no, she wasn't your biological mother, any more than she was mine." The three of us sat in silence, each processing the implications of these revelations. We were all connected by lies and legal documents and shared history, but none of us were related in the ways we had believed. Patricia wasn't my mother or Marcus's mother. Robert wasn't Marcus's father. The only real blood relationship in the room was between Marcus and me, and we had spent our entire lives believing we were unrelated. "There's more," I said, pulling out the will and estate documents. "Patricia left specific instructions about the business and her assets." Robert nodded. "The lawyers are coming tomorrow for the reading. She said you both needed to be here." I looked at the legal documents, trying to make sense of the complex trust structures and beneficiary arrangements. Patricia had been thorough in her final planning, addressing every detail of how her estate would be distributed and how the family business would be managed going forward. "What did she leave us?" Marcus asked quietly. I scanned through the pages, noting the specific bequests and provisions. "It's complicated. She restructured everything to acknowledge the truth about our parentage, while trying to protect both of us financially." The next morning, we gathered in the conference room at Patricia's law firm for the formal reading of the will. James Wright, the attorney who had been handling Patricia's affairs for years, spread documents across the mahogany table and began reading through the legal language that would determine our futures. "To my adopted son, Marcus Chen Hendricks," he read, "biological son of David Chen and Jennifer Hendricks, I leave my personal residence on Maple Ridge Drive, all household contents, and a trust fund valued at approximately $1.2 million, to be administered until his 30th birthday." Marcus stared at the table, his face pale. Hearing the truth read aloud in legal language made it feel more real, more final. To my stepdaughter Sarah Chen, the lawyer continued, biological daughter of David Chen and rightful heir to his estate, I leave my full ownership stake in Chen Medical Equipment Supply, along with all associated assets, real estate holdings, and business accounts. The current value of these assets is approximately $7 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. Patricia had given me everything, not just the business that should have been mine by right, but her entire financial empire. She had kept the truth from me for 28 years, but in the end, she had tried to make it right. Additionally, James continued, Mrs. Chen has established a joint trust to be administered by both Sarah Chen and Marcus Chen Hendricks, which will fund ongoing operations of the Chen Medical Equipment Foundation, a new charitable organization focused on providing medical supplies to underserved communities. He set down the will and looked at both of us. There are also personal letters for each of you to be delivered privately. My letter was shorter than the one I had read the night before, written in Patricia's increasingly shaky handwriting as her health declined. Sarah, I have spent your entire life trying to protect Marcus from the truth about his birth, and in doing so I hurt you in ways I am only now beginning to understand. You deserved better from me. You deserved honesty, support, and recognition of your rightful place in this family. I cannot undo the damage I have caused, but I can try to restore what was always yours. The business, the money, the respect you should have received from the beginning. It is all yours now, as it should have been from the moment David died. I hope you will use it to build something better than what I created. When I looked up, Marcus was reading his own letter, tears streaming down his face. When he finished, he set it aside and looked at me. She told me the truth about my mother, he said quietly. About why Jennifer gave me up. About how Patricia threatened her to stay away. She said Jennifer has been trying to find me for years, but Patricia blocked every attempt. Are you going to contact her? Marcus wiped his eyes. I don't know. Maybe. Patricia left me her contact information, along with letters Jennifer wrote to me over the years that were never delivered. We sat in the lawyer's office for another hour, going through the practical details of estate administration and business transition. By the time we left, I was officially the owner of Chen Medical Equipment Supply, with full authority to run the company as I saw fit. Marcus was financially secure for life, with enough money to pursue whatever path he chose without worrying about survival. But more importantly, we both finally knew the truth about who we were and where we came from. That evening, we returned to the house on Maple Ridge Drive for the last time as a family unit. Robert was moving out the following week, relocating to a smaller place in Tempe where he could start over without the weight of Patricia's secrets pressing down on him. Marcus wasn't sure what he wanted to do with the house, whether to sell it or keep it or turn it into something else entirely. We sat in the backyard as the sun set, drinking beer and talking about our childhoods, with the new knowledge of what had really been happening behind the scenes. Marcus told me about feeling like he never quite belonged, about sensing tension in Patricia's interactions with him that he couldn't understand. I told him about the constant message that I should be grateful for basic care and attention, about feeling like I was always one mistake away from being sent away. We were both damaged by this, I said as the stars began to appear in the desert sky, just in different ways. What happens now? Marcus asked. With the business? With us? With everything? I had been thinking about that question since reading Patricia's will. The company was mine now, legally and morally, but it felt strange to inherit something that had been built on so much deception and pain. At the same time, it was my father's legacy, the work he had been passionate about before his life was cut short. I think I want to move the company to Portland, I said. Expand into medical research equipment, partner with universities and hospitals on genetic research projects. There's a lot of opportunity there. And me? I looked at my half-brother, this person I had grown up with but never really known because of the lies that surrounded us. That's up to you. You could come with me, learn the business, become a partner. Or you could do something completely different. You have enough money now to try anything. Marcus was quiet for a long time. I think I want to find Jennifer first. My mother. I want to understand what really happened, hear her side of the story. That makes sense. But after that, Maybe I would like to learn about the business, about what our father built. Our father. It was the first time either of us had referred to David that way, acknowledging the connection we shared through him. It felt strange, but right, like claiming something that had always belonged to us but had been kept just out of reach. 3 days later, I stood in Patricia's bedroom, going through her personal belongings and deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. Most of it felt like artifacts from someone else's life, elegant clothes and expensive jewelry that had never really suited the woman I remembered. But in the back of her closet, I found a small wooden box that contained photographs I had never seen before. They were pictures of David, taken before I was born, showing him as a young man starting his business and building his dreams. There were photos of him and Patricia in happier times, before the betrayal and bitterness that had defined their later years. And at the bottom of the box, I found something that made my heart stop. It was a photograph of David holding a baby, his face full of love and wonder, as he looked down at the tiny person in his arms. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "Sarah, age 3 months, my beautiful daughter." I sat on Patricia's bed, holding that photograph and crying for the father I had barely remembered, for the man who had loved me completely in the short time we had together. Patricia had kept this picture hidden for 28 years, but she had kept it, preserved it, maybe even looked at it sometimes when she was struggling with the choices she had made. In that moment, I understood something about Patricia that I had never seen before. She hadn't been evil or calculating or deliberately cruel. She had been broken by my father's betrayal, damaged by the impossible situation of raising her husband's illegitimate child alongside his legitimate one, overwhelmed by grief and anger and the social expectations of being a perfect widow and mother. Her choices had been wrong, but they had come from pain rather than malice. I found Marcus in the kitchen, packing up the last of his belongings. When I showed him the photograph, he stared at it for a long time before handing it back. "He looks happy," Marcus said. He was happy. Patricia told me once that he wanted children more than anything in the world. Do you think he would have loved me too, if he had lived? I thought about that question, about the man in the photograph who looked so full of joy at being a father. "Yes," I said. "I think he would have loved both of us." That afternoon, we held a small memorial service for Patricia in the backyard of the house on Maple Ridge Drive. It wasn't the formal funeral she had received a week earlier, with business associates and political connections paying their respects. This was just the 3 of us, who had lived with her lies and her love, who had been shaped by her choices and her fears. Robert spoke about the woman he had married, the brilliant real estate developer who had built an empire from nothing and who had sacrificed her own happiness to protect the children she had raised. Marcus talked about the mother he had known, demanding but caring, who had pushed him to be better, even when he couldn't understand why it mattered so much. When it was my turn, I found myself thinking about forgiveness and understanding, and the complicated nature of family love. Patricia wasn't perfect, I said. She made choices that hurt all of us, that damaged our ability to trust and connect and believe in unconditional love. But she also raised us, protected us in her own way, and tried to give us tools to survive in a world that doesn't always reward honesty or kindness. I paused, looking at the desert landscape that had been the backdrop for my entire childhood. I don't know if I can forgive her for the lies or the years of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, but I can understand that she was doing the best she could with an impossible situation, and that her failures came from her own pain rather than from indifference to ours. After the service, Marcus and I walked through the house one last time, saying goodbye to the rooms and spaces that had defined our childhoods. In Patricia's office, I found one last document she had left for me. A business plan for expanding Chen medical equipment supply into genetic research and personalized medicine. Even in death, Patricia had been thinking about the future, about how to turn our family's legacy of secrets and lies into something positive and healing. She had researched genetic counseling programs, identified potential partnerships with research institutions, and outlined strategies for helping families navigate the complex emotional terrain of DNA testing and genetic inheritance. It was as if she had finally understood what I had been trying to tell her 3 years earlier when I confronted her with the DNA results. The science of genetics wasn't just about proving who belonged and who didn't. It was about helping people understand their histories, heal their relationships, and build stronger connections based on truth rather than convenient fiction. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Chen Genetic Solutions, the Portland-based company I had built from the foundation of my father's medical supply business. Marcus was there, having completed a crash course in business administration and genetic counseling. Robert had joined us as a consultant, bringing his decades of experience in medical equipment, sales, and distribution. We had just signed a partnership agreement with Oregon Health and Science University to provide genetic counseling services for families dealing with complex inheritance issues, adoption revelations, and paternity questions. Our first client was a woman whose adopted daughter had discovered through DNA testing that she was actually the biological child of the woman's late husband, conceived during an affair that had nearly destroyed their marriage 20 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. We were using our own experience with family secrets and genetic revelations to help other families navigate similar crises with more honesty and compassion than we had received. As I signed the contracts that would launch this new phase of our business, I thought about Patricia and the letter she had left describing her hopes for what we might build from the wreckage of our family's lies. She had been right about one thing. The truth was always better than convenient fiction, even when it was more painful in the short term. Marcus had found Jennifer, his biological mother, and was slowly building a relationship with the woman who had given birth to him but had been forced to give him up. She was a nurse practitioner now, working in a clinic that served undocumented immigrants and other vulnerable populations. She had never stopped thinking about him, never stopped hoping that someday she would be able to explain why she had made the choices she had made. Robert had started dating again, a widow he had met in a grief support group who understood the complexity of loving someone while living with their secrets. He seemed lighter now, freed from the weight of pretending to be someone he wasn't for the sake of maintaining Patricia's carefully constructed narrative. And I had finally claimed the legacy that had always been mine, not just the business and the money, but the identity of being David Chen's daughter, a person who belonged somewhere and had the right to build something meaningful from her family's history. The company was thriving, helping families across the Pacific Northwest understand their genetic heritage and navigate the emotional complexities that came with scientific truth. We had hired a staff of genetic counselors, social workers, and legal advocates who specialized in helping people rebuild their relationships after DNA revelations had shattered their assumptions about family and belonging. But the most important thing we had built was a new relationship between Marcus and me. One based on honesty rather than competition, on shared purpose rather than manufactured rivalry. We were still learning how to be siblings, still figuring out how to trust each other after a lifetime of being told we were fundamentally different. But we were doing it together, with the support of people who understood that family isn't just about blood or legal documents or who was born first. Family is about choosing to love someone despite their flaws, to support them through their struggles, and to build something meaningful together from whatever materials you have available. Patricia had failed at that in many ways, but she had also given us the tools to do better, to create the kind of family we had needed as children but had been denied by her fears and pride. On the first anniversary of Patricia's death, Marcus and I returned to Phoenix to visit her grave and to see how Robert was doing in his new life. The desert looked different to me now, less harsh and forbidding, more like a place where resilient things could grow if they were given the right conditions. We stood at Patricia's headstone, reading the simple inscription she had chosen: Patricia Chen, beloved wife and mother. No dates, no flowery language, no attempt to summarize a complicated life in a few words. Just an acknowledgement of the roles she had chosen to play, imperfectly, but with genuine love for the people who had depended on her. Do you think she would be proud of what we've built? Marcus asked. I thought about that question. About the woman who had valued reputation and control above honesty and vulnerability. I think she would be surprised, I said finally. But yes, I think she would be proud that we found a way to turn her mistakes into something helpful for other people. As we walked back to our rental car, I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't expected. The anger and resentment that had driven me for so many years had finally transformed into something more constructive. A motivation to help other families avoid the pain that secrecy and lies had caused in ours. Patricia Chen had told everyone I was adopted, had made me believe I was an outsider who should be grateful for basic human dignity. But in the end, her lies had led me to a deeper understanding of what family really meant, and to a career built on helping people find truth and healing in the midst of genetic revelations that could either destroy relationships or make them stronger. I was David Chen's daughter, Marcus Chen's half-sister, and the founder of a business that helped families navigate the complex intersection of science and love. Those were the truths that mattered, the facts that would define my legacy long after Patricia's secrets had been forgotten. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.